The other great contrast is, which is behind a great difference between the English legal systems and elsewhere, is the absence of torture. Now, very early on, for complicated reasons, the English courts set their face against the use of torture. They believed that if you've tortured someone, you wouldn't get a true confession. They would just do it because of torture. There was no point, therefore, in torturing you. You didn't need their confession. You could prove them guilty on the basis of evidence, which was carefully weighed, and whether they confessed or not was irrelevant. And so, apart from a short period around the 1530s, 1540s in England, middle of the 1500s, when torture was used a little bit in one or two political trials, for about 500 years it had been completely illegal to torture someone. Now, the European tradition of Roman law is based on the idea that you must get a confession. The person cannot be finally proved to be guilty unless they've made a confession. So if they don't make a confession voluntarily, then they must be forced to do so. Strangely enough, this went on, for instance, into Stalin's era. These long interrogations were because finally they couldn't actually shoot someone through the head until they had signed a confession. So they were forced into signing confessions. Now, you found that both in the Catholic faith, in the church courts, in the Inquisition, which used torture to force you into saying, I am guilty, and also in the secular courts, which did the same thing. It was essential as part of the legal process. You couldn't convict someone. In England, it doesn't matter what they think. If the rest of us think they're guilty, which is a release, because you can go on internally saying, I'm not guilty, even though they found me guilty. But they can't force you to say it. The only use of torture in English law was a peculiar one. That was that you must submit to the rule of law. You must admit that the courts have the right to try you, the jurisdiction. So you must make a pleading. You must say, yes, I plead guilty or I plead not guilty. What you plead is up to you. But if you refuse to plead, in other words, if you refuse to accept the authority of the court, certainly in the early centuries, they would torture you. Basically, they would put heavy weights on you. The pen forte dure, hard and long. And they would just crush you very slowly with heavy weights until you said, okay, yes, I'm not guilty. Now, that's a sort of torture, but it's a rather mild kind in the sense that all they're asking you to do is to say something, not just to keep your mouth shut.